We want to get into the little bit of the history of Disney Imagineering today, but also your history, and then really follow it up with questions on process, which I think you have a lot of experience in. So, um, well, why don't you introduce yourself and just give us a little, overview of Jeff Burton, and then we'll get into the details.
Okay, I'm the old guy on the screen. So I go back quite a ways with Disney, but also with another company. And I came to Disney in 1980 after getting an architectural license in 2 states and my master's degree in architecture, as well as a first undergraduate degree in architecture. So I worked as an architect, and I taught architecture at the University of Illinois, where I got my 2 degrees. And I also then transitioned to Disney out in California in 1980 for EPCOT Center. And so I was responsible for, as a project manager, not a direct architect, but managing the process by which we get themed attractions, at least the Disney ones, during my Disney years. And that included the construction portion of the Italy Pavilion, the design and construction of the China Pavilion, the design and construction of the Morocco Pavilion, and the design and construction of the Norway Pavilion. So those spans of time were my Disney things in Florida. And I had miscellaneous things along the way. And then I transitioned to Walt Disney Imagineering in Europe for the Euro Disneyland. So I was responsible there for the construction portion of Main Street USA. And just about a year before that, I was in the real estate development company for Disney for Euro Disneyland hotels. And then after I returned from Europe, after we opened, actually I spent a year fighting claims, contractor claims, came back to Florida and worked on Sunset Boulevard, which leads up to the Tower of Terror. So we had 2 teams all together in one kind of construction compound. So that was one of the last things I did for Disney before I left. And then I transitioned to a company called iTech Entertainment, which is now Tate, T-A-I-T. And I was with iTech for 24 years, did the Billy Graham Library, and work in a lot of different places around the world, including Santiago, Chile. Also did the Holy Land Experience in Orlando, Florida, which is now being deconstructed. So they sold it, and it's being, I think, now owned by Advent Health. So I think they're going to build a campus there. So that's me kind of in a nutshell, but you guys can dig out other stuff, and Nate wants to dig out other stuff as well.
Yeah,
so get on with the portion of what Nate wants on his agenda.
Well, okay. So, and guys, just to let you know, I think you've all watched the Imagineering story, but I think I was 24 when Jeff hired me at iTech, and I got the Imagineering story in 5-minute segments every morning before we started work. I'd go in there and, hey, Jeff, tell me a story. And that's kind of part of how I got mentored, not just the skills portion of, Jeff would say, listen, you're going to get a notebook and you're going to take notes this way. Little practical things that he was always pouring into my personal life. But also I got this glimpse of history that Jeff was a part of that I thought was very interesting. So why don't you start out and tell us how you got a job as an Imagineer?
Yeah, Nate loves this story. So I was teaching at the University of Illinois after I got my master's degree and passed my exams in Illinois for architecture. And the reason I was teaching is Sam Lanford was one of the professors there, full professor. He took a sabbatical out to Seattle, and this was in 1980. And he was going to be gone for 2 years, and they asked me to take over his coursework and the other course that I had been teaching as a graduate assistant. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. I love the idea of teaching. There's a renewal of students every semester, every year. And so I settled down into those two assignments. And then Mount St. Helens erupted. And Sam called and said, I'm coming back, so I need my office. So I went back to the authorities, folks, faculty folks at the university and said, hey, you got a spot for me? And they said, no. And I said, okay, well, I got to do something. And at that time, we had hired a professor from UCLA who was a specialist in geriatric architecture or the aging architecture. And they wanted to add that to the skill sets that they had on the faculty. And by the way, the University of Illinois, at the time I started school, when I was a freshman, there were 1,500 students in the program. And it was rated anywhere from third to fifth in terms of the quality of the education at that time. I was teaching classes that were anywhere from 125 up to 250 when I was there. And so there was a broad range of options that you could do in architecture there. Anyway, this fella came from UCLA. He was flying back and forth before he took the permanent assignment, and he brought with a 2-page ad from the LA Times. And you open it up and it said, Mickey wants you. It was the old United States military type thing where Mickey points at you and says, Mickey wants you to join the Air Force or the Navy or whatever. So this was Disney wants you, and it was Mickey pointing. And I answered that ad. Now, mind you, there were no such things as email or texts. Faxes were done on thermofax paper on a round cylinder. So everything had to be done by U.S. Postal Service or FedEx at that time, or UPS. And so I assembled a portfolio, a little bound portfolio, a letter, and I sat down with one of my mentor professors and I said, trying to figure out how to send this and who do I address it to? It says, address it to WED Maple Employment. I said, I don't want to do that. That just sounds like a big box of resumes somewhere in an office. And indeed, there were 2,000 applicants per week at this time for WDI, 2,000 a week. There were 20 people being hired every week by WDI. So they went from about 300 to about 2,500 in this time period to handle the load for Epcot Center and Tokyo Disneyland. I had put all this together, and my good friend and mentor, Professor Lewis, looked in his grab bag of stuff that he had, and he had the comprehensive plan for the property in Florida that was produced by Wing Chow. I sent that out, had it copied, stuck it in a briefcase, read through it, and then we looked at other pieces of paper that he had, and there had been an announcement that he attended in Florida because he was the keynote speaker for the landscape architects that year, and he watched the groundbreaking ceremony for Epcot Center by Card Walker. So Walt, and we called him Uncle Walt, Walt said, why don't you address it to Card Walker? He's the chairman of Walt Disney Productions. I said, okay. So, dear Mr. Walker, put down my letter, bundle everything together, put it in a big manila envelope, and send it off to California to the WED Maple address. Now, I don't remember if it was WED Maple or if it was actually the Walt Disney Company corporate address. At any rate, that was like snail mail. A week later, I got a telephone call from John Zovich's office, who is the vice president of engineering for Walt Disney Imagineering. And the secretary said, can you come out on June 12th? And I said, I'm sorry, I cannot. Now, this is Disney calling, and I said, I can't be there on June 12th. As I think back on that, it was kind of crazy. She said, okay, how about July 1? And I said, okay. on June 12th, I was going up to Chicago for another interview for another job. So I did that on June 12th, and then on July 1st, I went out to the airport in Champaign, Illinois, got on an airplane, went to the desk to get my ticket, first class ticket, and they said, wow, they must really want you out there badly. Well, at that time, Disney flew everybody first class. Now, this is different for Nate. He flies super first class all the time. But that for me was a big deal. So I lugged all my portfolios and things out to California. They picked me up at the airport with one of those signs like Mr. Burton, right? Got in a car, drove up to Burbank from the LA airport, and then over to Glendale, and went into the Flower Street offices. And they shuffled me around and brought me over to John Zovich and Bud Stacy's place. Bud was the director of engineering. And we sat there for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes or so, had an interview. It was a great interview. I said, you want to see my portfolio? They said, no, that's not what you'd be doing here. You're going to manage projects. That's what you put down. I said, really? I said, yeah. So I thought back to the resume and to the application, and it said, what position are you applying for? And I didn't know what to write. Uncle Walt said, why don't you write project management for EPCOT Center, liaison between Florida and California? That's what I wrote. And they said, okay. So I spent one day at Disneyland, and then over the weekend stayed with the friend that was the architect professor that was coming from UCLA, and then flew back to Illinois, to Champaign. In my mailbox, about a week later, was a job offer, which I accepted. I had 3 offers at that time, and I took the Disney offer. And on August 1st, now remember, this is July 1st interview, August 1st, on an airplane to California, having packed up my apartment and my car into a moving van, which was on the way to California. So 30 days is all it took for me to interview and have a job at Disney. And when I got there, I was one of only a few project managers for all of EPCOT Center. In fact, they gave me some of the first World Showcase projects to be opened. And at that time, a guy named Bob Mansfield, who was an old-time Disney guy, had all 10 of the World Showcase projects. And so he and I divided up some of them, and I got Morocco and Costa Rica to start. So that's that in a nutshell, and that's kind of the introduction on how I got to Disney.
Yeah, so the takeaway there, number one, you were what? Didn't you say you were the youngest project manager?
I was 29 years old when I went out there, and I was the youngest project manager on the largest construction project in the world at that time.
Wow.
Not the youngest person working on the project, but from a project management standpoint, I was one of the youngest. Now, another takeaway from this is I read the comprehensive plan. I did research on all of the pavilions, all of the property, the 43 square miles. I could recite all of the information about each of the pavilions. I could recite information about the project itself, about the land, the acquisition of the land, Reedy Creek Improvement District, and I used that during the interview. I could talk those things. I had a second interview at Disney at that time on July 1st, and that was with Wing Chow. And I brought my things in to see Wing. The Disney folks, the folks that handle HR, took me over to see Wing Chow's office, different building there. And Wing and I sat there, and I said, do you want to see some of my work? And so I opened I had three things with a briefcase and 2 small portfolios. So I'm lugging all this stuff, plus luggage. And I opened one briefcase, and in there was the spiral bound comprehensive plan. And Wing looked at it and he said, what's that? And I go, well, that's the comprehensive plan. He says, I wrote that. I said, really? He goes, yeah. I said, I read it. So we talked. And I think he was impressed because he's always trying to get me to come work with him. And eventually, kind of that happened when I went with the real estate development group in Europe. But we remained friends and colleagues over the years. And I don't call him up all the time or anything like that. But it's nice to know that he was part of that interview process. I got to Disney, and 2 weeks later, they flew me to Florida. When I got back, I picked up my mail. I opened one of the envelopes. It was addressed to me, but forwarded to Imagineering, addressed to me in Illinois. And I opened it up and I read it, and it said, "We're sorry to say we don't have a position for you." So I went to Bud Stacy and I said, "Bud, I got this letter. What do you think?" He goes, reads it, and he goes, "Ignore that. Get back in your office and go to work." I eventually figured out that it was Wing's office that did not have a position for me. And later on, I kind of clarified that with him. And so somewhere in my memorabilia stack of stuff, I've got that letter, but it's kind of an interesting part of the whole getting hired story.
I think there was some wisdom in what you said. Number one, the way you avoided the, going in the front door just by trying to send a letter to HR, but then also the preparation in terms of knowing what Wing Chung had already said, what he'd already prepared. So you knew you could talk the language with him.
Well, absolutely. And, so I could talk about how much was conservation area and how much was dedicated to land. And so Wing Chow's, it's Chow, C-H-O-W. Wing
Chow,
Chow's,
sorry.
Yeah, no, Wing Chow's thought process, was apparent in the comprehensive plan. So it was how to develop this whole property here, and it was telling. And later on, the information that was in there, and I had a notebook. Remember, take notes, Nate. I took notes. So on the airplane, I'm reviewing all the notes about which pavilions were going to be there, and what was slated and how much area and how big the lagoon was and all that kind of stuff. And it was months later when one of the guys who was working area development as a project manager and had been there long before me, because that portion of the project already started, and he said to me, "Jeff, can you tell me which pavilions are in World Showcase again?" I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. So yeah, it was very nice. I went over it with him and we went on with life. But it's always good to be extraordinarily over prepared, if I can even say that, for what you're going to do next. Get in there, dig around. I tell my kids this, right? They're both working and employed now, so I don't worry so much about that part. But I tell them that to get prepared, know something about the company, know a lot about the company, be able to talk that back and forth, and that just helps you in your course of things.
Right. Yeah. I completely agree. The fact that you did that without an internet, is astounding. So
yeah, no internet, no texting, I don't even know that voicemail was there without a recorder on your phone gizmo in the kitchen or whatever. So
yeah. So
yeah.
okay.
Oh, and no computer to type the resume on.
Oh,
So
even
the
worse.
resume had to be done, written by hand, and I gave it. They were very nice to me. Gave it to one of the secretaries in the Department of Architecture, and they typed it for me, and I proofed it. And we went over, and then I had it run off at a print shop. Not even a copy machine in the library at the university, because that gave you thermofax copies. So I essentially had it printed for me, not really copied. So that's kind of an interesting time period. But you didn't know those things were coming. Computers and able to mess with the word processing and all that. You just use what was there.
Yeah, Matthew has his hand raised. Should we ignore him? Yeah.
No, absolutely. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, it's really interesting hearing a little bit about your story because Bob Rogers has very similar advice is to send letters to people. And I'm just curious, when you sent that letter, how did that to those specific people, how did that impact you in the sense like did they follow up and said, we don't receive a lot of letters or this was unique or you shown you put effort? I'm curious how that was because these days, yeah, there are a lot of emails are sent and young professionals don't write a bunch of letters too often. So I'm really curious, like, was that maybe the letter, that tipping point that like, wow, this kid's really interested to sit down and write a letter to us?
Well, I first it was to Card Walker, and I think my opening statement was, I recognize you are probably not the person to make the decision, but you know where to forward this letter, right? So I recognized, so here's my rule when I write a letter. Write the letter as though you're the person receiving it, and it will be very successful. So you have to step into someone else's shoes. And I do the same thing when I do emails, and I coach people on writing emails when I was at iTech. You have to write as though you're receiving it. And then when you read it, you're in that person's shoes, you're listening to the person who's writing it, and you're saying, oh, I get it. And that makes you be very clear about what you want. It makes you be very succinct, right? You have to choose, all the words mean something. Every word means something. And if you remember that, you can shorten things, you can change things, don't repeat words, you try to make it very succinct. You start out long ago, there's not a theory, it's a process of stating in the beginning what you want, going through a couple of things, and then stating at the end what you want, right? So you kind of wrap everything up. That way, at the beginning, if there's a question about what the letter's seeking, it's right there. And that could be shuffled off in one paragraph to a secretary. Hey, get this over to John Zovich right away. Looks like an applicant for blah, 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 right? Well, I included in there information about what I'd been doing. And one of the things I said, look, I had never been to a theme park before. I'd never been in a Disney park. I'd never been in an amusement park. But I wrote down that I was doing themed architecture. And part of this was because I had read about the thematic things in World Showcase, right? That they would be themed after different parts of countries. So I wrote, I have been doing some urban planning things, right? I have been doing themed architecture. I don't know if I called it theme architecture. I said I worked on a Swiss village in Wisconsin. That's when I was practicing architecture there with an architecture firm. So I gave succinct little bits and pieces about me so you didn't have to read the resume. I also included a chart, hand drawn, hand lettered in a matrix form because there was no Excel at that time, at least for me, with little dots about the types of things that I had done. So when we talk about process, we talk about concept design, working drawings, right? Construction, administration, those types of things. I had the projects listed that I'd worked on, lots of residential, a hotel, the Swiss village, and I put the matrix together like that. It's probably one reason why I got an interview with Wing Chow, because I had talked about doing some urban planning, because that's what Wing's expertise was at that time. He's an architect, but he's a planner. So that, I did not get anything back from Mr. Walker's office. I got a telephone call from John Zovich's office. That was how that worked. And it worked so very quickly that I knew something interesting happened, and that by that I knew Card was aware that Imagineering was hiring and that they needed people, and that EPCOT was going to be a big deal for him, right? That was his baby. And so you put two and two together and you go, okay, well, I guess I wrote a successful letter. I sent the right stuff. I did the right, formatting, right? It wasn't an overly long letter. It was a few things that could help explain who I was and a few drawings and things like that. Ramble. Mr. Zovich and Mr. Stacy were not interested at all in my drawings. Not at all. He said, you're an architect, you have licensing, you're experienced, you have some stuff under your belt, you were teaching, bring you on. Got the offer, I took it, and I moved to California. So I still write letters to people. You know, I might find a product I like or a product I don't like or something, whatever. I will send an email, but I'm very careful about how I word it. Sometimes I get a response back, sometimes I don't. 2 instances recently, I got responses back, not from employers, but from products. And for me, if you're succinct in these things and you're clear and you're lucid in your explanation and you get to your point and you say what you want and why you're writing, you can have success.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You had mentioned flying first class, and that everyone flew first class when you first came on with Disney. Talk about some of the, because each corporate culture is a little bit different and each CEO is a little bit different. So you came on in a time when Card Walker was in charge, and then it transitioned to Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, and then later on it went just to Michael Eisner. So talk about some of the corporate cultural aspects of working at WED, now WDI, in those time periods.
Well, the first class flying started with Walt. He said, we are a first class organization. I'm paraphrasing, I guess, because this is how he probably talked about it. And he wanted everybody to feel, equal in that regard. So even folks who were doing janitorial work, if they had to fly for Disney, they flew first class. And that was indicative of a company that treated folks like they were special, and that was WDI. And WDI was, mostly was very separate from the theme parks. Theme parks at that time had very strict regulations about dress codes and what you could wear and what you couldn't wear, and you couldn't have a mustache. I could not wear a name badge and walk in the park with my mustache. And I had my mustache since 1971 or 72 when I was going to school. And they told you right off, don't wear your name badge in the theme park, because that's not part of the dress code for the theme parks. And indeed it wasn't. And the treatment of everybody was very much equal, except that the WDI folks, the WED Imagineering folks, were recognized as the creative force, and you're not going to get people to just shave off all their beards and mustaches and still be creative. They have to have this specialized treatment, I guess you could call it. But there was a great deal of respect all around. I mean, we called people graybeards out there. Bill Dennis, he grew a beard during Epcot Center, and he talked about things like when we built World. Well, Bill Dennis worked on Disneyland. He worked on Walt Disney World. There are very few people in the world have 4 or 5 theme parks of Disney caliber under their belt. He was one of them, and then there were others. You could bump shoulders and elbows with folks like Herbie Ryman and Ken Anderson. Ken was one of my favorite people at WDI. They had offices upstairs in the 1401 Flower Building. And I would go up there and sit with Ken. And we worked on the Africa Pavilion together. When you'll notice that there's an Africa juice bar at Epcot Center, but there's no Africa Pavilion. But we went through a whole conceptual design process and actually a filming process in Africa for a film for that. Well, just sitting with Ken and listening to him talk about his relationship with Walt and the studio days and how that all went was an education in itself. That was not part of anything. John Zovich and Buzz Stacy said, "Now go find Ken and figure out what's going on." It was find time on your own and go sit with these people. So Herb Ryman, and you guys all know about Herbie Ryman. We have a Herbie Ryman print in our living room. that my wife bought from the Disney store, the Disney Gallery at Disneyland. And it's actually signed by Herbie. And he was one of the conceptors for, along with Ken Anderson, for pavilions. So the China Pavilion had a drawing by, or a painting by Herb Ryman. So the atmosphere out there was a growing thing from about 300 people, and it had been run by Orlando Ferrante. He was the executive VP or president of WDI or WED Enterprises before Carl Bongiorno came in. And Carl was there to oversee the strengthening and the growth of WDI from about 300 to that 2,500 mark. And so this was a time period in a transitional area where a small group of people of 300 were teaching another 2,100 or 2,200 people how to do Disney theme parks. And if you know the history of Disneyland, you know that Walt brought together guys from the studio to create Disneyland rides and attractions. And so now it was being passed on by these other folks. WED and Mapo were together. Mapo, the MAPO, Mary Poppins, was the production arm of WDI. They made the audio animatronic figures, the sets and scenics that needed to go into Epcot Center and any other attraction that was being done for Walt Disney World, Magic Kingdom, or whatever, Disneyland and the like. And so this was a passing on of skill sets and information and all the things that were needed by an older, longer Disney employed group of people to help other people learn. Now, there were people in the theme parks that were Disney folks that were brought into WDI at that time. So coordinators and schedulers and the like came from the parks because they knew all about parks and the types of things that needed to be done to design a successful park. So capacities for restrooms or locations for restrooms or custodial things or food and beverage people or retail people. You know, what do you do for retail? What does the store have to look like? How is it organized, right? So that information was being passed on at that time. The information about operations, you know, when do parks open? How long are they open? How many people do you need for this? What kind of wardrobes are needed? All those types of things that were important to the success of a theme park that was drawn on the knowledge of Disneyland, which opened in 1955, and Walt Disney World Magic Kingdom that opened in 72, were now being brought forward to 1980, 79 and 80, 81 and 82 with the opening of Epcot in 82. And so I learned from these people. And I had a coordinator who was also learning, but he was the knowledge base for me for many of my pavilions, Paul Eisenbraun, great guy. I went hiking with him in California. We worked on theme parks together. It was a terrific time. And I had schedulers. The amazing thing to me was how some of these folks came together in a team, because you have to realize this was a time frame when we weren't replicating a Disney park that already existed. So if you look at Disneyland, you go, oh, that's neat. That's a very favorite park of mine. It's like a little jeweled ring. It's very small and tiny, and you can get your hands around it. Walt Disney World Magic Kingdom has a larger footprint, but they are basically similar. You don't see both of them in the same day, but you would say, oh, they're kind of the same thing, right? They're Magic Kingdoms. Epcot Center, entirely new, absolutely new. And so lots of new technologies there that drew on the expertise of folks from the parks, but also from new people coming in to create, an energy pavilion, a imagination pavilion, all the different parts and pieces that had never been done before. And so people were working together on teams. And the best part about the Epcot Center team structure was that everybody had one goal in mind, which was to open Epcot Center. You were focused on your own projects, but you also knew that there were people that could help you from all over WDI and the rest of the company, right? The rest of the company. So the director, Bill Sullivan for Epcot Center, and Norm Durgis, those two guys together operationally helped control and dictate what needed to be done operationally for the parks. So there's a design portion, there's an operations portion, and operations was food and beverage, retail, and then the normal other ride operations, and then the support stuff, custodial maintenance and the like. So all these things came together with people working together, and there was not, I don't remember a single instance where people went, hey, don't look at what I'm doing, or hey, I'm better than you are because I'm doing this pavilion. Everybody was working together doing their thing, but as a group. There was a slogan put out, which was, we can do it. And everybody got badges for that. And there was lots of good publicity out within the company about what was going on. We had pins for each of the major pavilions, showcase, and the other parts of Epcot, so that everybody was together and got together regularly for that. So it was a great effort with everybody working together. Not that there weren't conflicts on things and problems to be solved, and there's lots of war stories about that. So that transition from 300 folks to 2,500 folks, and by the way, Tokyo was being designed and built at that time also. So there was another group of people that I didn't even interact with that went over to Tokyo. And my group, eventually relocated to Florida for the most part to get things built. When we traveled, it was first class. I would fly back and forth. This is where I got a lot of first class miles from Delta on my frequent flyers. So I eventually made 1 million miles. Now I know Nate's got like 18 million miles on airplanes, but I feel great about mine. I started my frequent flyer program as soon as they announced it, and they allowed us to send in boarding cards from whenever we had them, going back years.
Oh, nice.
Packed them all up, and we copied them and sent them off to Delta, and they gave me a glob of miles to begin with. And I thought, well, this is great. This is terrific. So that was the start of frequent flyer miles, way back in the 80s. But we learned from all these things. And every time I flew to Florida, I'd walk around and they'd look at me like, oh, you're a California boy, right? I go, yeah, I live in California. When I got back on the airplane and I got into back to California, walked into the building again, Orlando Franti would come up to me and go, so how was the vacation in Florida? I thought, you guys, I was in the mud. Oh, I flew on the Mouse, Walt's plane.
Really? Okay. Tell us that story. I didn't know that.
5 different flights, not round trips, but 5 different California, Florida, or Florida, California legs. And it's a 2-engine, had Rolls-Royce engines, 2 engines. I think it was a Gulfstream, I'm not sure. It was retired to Florida to do marketing around Florida. So they flew on the Mouse around Florida. And then it was retired again to the studio. And so you could go see the Mouse. You didn't go inside, but there was the Mouse sitting there at the studio, an appropriate place for it. I don't know if it's still there or not, but so when seats were available on the Mouse, I think it was 9 seats. When they were available and you were scheduled to go to Florida or come back from Florida to California, you got a seat. That was it. You didn't get to go commercial on Delta, first class. I got to sit in Walt's seat. I thought, this is heaven. This is terrific. And sometimes, at least 1 or 2 trips I flew, and there were vice presidents on the plane, right? Like Zovich and Orlando Ferranti. They like to play poker and take your per diem money in the game. And I managed to avoid that mostly. But just sitting on the plane, there were 2 pilots. We landed in Waco, I want to say Waco, Texas. to refuel. And the plane would land, right? We'd get off and walk into a tiny little building, right? And they would run out and refuel the plane, and it had the mouse on the tail, and everybody, oh, you're Disney, and that's the Disney plane. It was just so cool. And then get back on. Well, it was 9 hours of flying, right? So a stopover was well worth it. So I flew 5 different legs, from California to Florida or back to California. So sometimes I would return or fly out on the commercial and then back on the plane. But a very cool airplane, very cool, very neat.
That's fun.
It's just great, right? You look out, there's the engines going, and you're not, I don't know, just 25,000 feet in the air, I guess, I'm thinking, but quite a thing. Oh, and then the best part, instead of flying commercial, the best part was landing at Orlando Airport. Now, in the beginning, it was what is now the UPS facility, right? Not the big airport. So you landed, it's before the big airport was built. We'd land, taxi, get off, walk off the airplane, and the rental cars were lined up right there. We'd walk into the building, they'd hand us the papers. So it was like private landing strip, right, for the airplane. And we'd pick up the papers for the rental car, jump in the rental car, and drive out to Disney. That was the most convenient thing. It was just terrific. And then you could drop it off.
Well, was this the airstrip that's basically right behind Space Mountain at Magic Kingdom, or was it somewhere else?
This was out at where the B-17 or B-52s landed. It's at OIA or MCO, right? MCO stands for, McCoy Air Force Base. Right. Yeah. It was a B-52 base. There's still B-52 on parked there, right? It's off to the side. You can go visit the B-52. So it had really long runways and all that kind of good stuff. But it was not, it had a small terminal. It was a dinky little terminal. And we flew into that terminal. And then when we landed the airplane, there were the rental cars, pick them up and run back. That's when the Beeline Expressway had tolls of 10 cents and 20 cents. So you had to have dimes in your pocket to get out to Disney.
Wow.
Anyway, that was fun. So when Card left, don't remember who succeeded. I think Ray Watson was in there, but then Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came on board, and that was quite an interesting thing. That was in around 85, I think, in that range of time. And they looked at air travel and lots of other things. And so there were new rules in place where you had to be flying over 5 hours or something, or internationally, and then you could fly business. And sometimes first, I guess, if business didn't exist. And, people went, oh, that's not so good. Look, it was Disney. We were having a great time. You were flying to places that were really terrific. I flew to Morocco, first class on Royal Air Morocco, at least twice. Can't remember, it was twice or 3 times. That's an experience. I mean, linen tablecloths, right? Just, wine glasses, all that kind of good stuff. I mean, Delta was good in first class. Royal Air Morocco was where the king flew on that plane. So I go, okay. And that was his, the same service for him as for us. It was really nice, very nice service. But the big changes, I think, were the mass of people coming in. I wasn't there for 300 people. I was there for, I don't remember how many, but it gradually grew and grew and grew. And the campus grew in California from the 2 buildings at Flower Street to many more buildings to accommodate the amount of people, including those for Euro Disneyland. Because when I worked in the real estate group, there was one building dedicated to the planning for Euro Disney, the property there. So the changes, gradual, people accepted them, but it was still the camaraderie of the people you worked with that really got things done, and learning about all the new things that could be put in place for things. Look, DVDs and CDs were just coming out. That was beginning to be part of the new technology for audio and video systems. The China Pavilion had 9 Circle Vision screens and 9 projectors with bin loops, 35 millimeter film in a bin loop. And so the film ran round and round and round and round and round, and it just dumped into a bin that the film was on a continuous loop. I'm sure today they've changed it over to better technologies, right? But you had to sync everything. SMPTE was a syncing mechanism so that the sound synced up with what was happening on the screen. But it was a good time. I don't know if that answers questions. There's probably more. But...
Yeah, well, I think we want to get into the development of the pavilions and some of your experiences with that. But do you guys have any questions so far? At a certain point, we want to segue also into, the process. But let's talk. Well, do you guys have questions here before we go into pavilions or no?
Yeah, raise hands. Questions are good. Questions are good.
All right. Well, raise your hand in the chat if you want. But talk
just
about
stop anytime.
You've got some fantastic stories about, I think there was you somehow conned some local company into giving you a sailboat for the Norway attraction. There was one time, I think you told me something about the Viking boat escaping. There was a Viking ship there, and I think that was somewhere, and then you have some pretty great stories about just the way the artisans created all the Morocco the mosaics as well. And the other thing I just want to say is that all of the pavilions have now, obviously Norway has changed over to frozen, but they have remarkable staying power just because they've got really timeless architecture. So it's required very, very little updating. But why don't you talk about the development of some of those pavilions that you worked on and some of the trips you talked about, taking a trip with Joe Rohde over to Norway and different things like that. But yeah, talk about Morocco and some of those things.
All right. So the 4 pavilions that I did for World Showcase were Italy, China, Morocco, and Norway. Very quickly on Italy, I came in at the construction phase. They were just taking the bids. The bids were high. Part of the pavilion disappeared, and what was built there is absent some things. If you look at old pictures of the model of Italy, you will see that parts of it are not there in its current configuration. We had a fun thing. Bill Tyson and I, Bill Tyson was the project engineer for Italy. And one day we walked out on the promenade, and all the parts and pieces of the fiberglass that were going into the Doge's palace were sitting in crates on the sidewalk, kind of in the mud because we hadn't really paved everything yet. And I looked at Bill and I said, Italy Pavilion, some assembly required. The next day, Bill brought a sign out and stuck it in the mud right next to all of those. Italy Pavilion, some assembly required. And the eyes and ears guys came by and took a picture of that, and it was actually an eyes and ears. And Bill credits me with, and he's passed on now, but Bill credits me with creating that little scenario, Italy Pavilion, some assembly required. It was just a big laugh that we had right there. So we got done with that. China was mine from the very beginning, but it was not part of the original pavilions. Sometime in the early part of 1981, actually the latter part of 81, we got the word from Card, Walker, and corporate that there was to be a China pavilion. And they gave it to me, because all I was doing at that time was these other pavilions that were getting canceled. Africa, Costa Rica, Morocco had been delayed. China was unique because there was going to be a film in China. We couldn't go visit. The only person that went, the people that went from Disney were the film crew. Randy Bright went, they did helicopter shots for China. We had to design at home in California. Dalmont Grants was the designer. We got our work done. We got the designs all done. everything ready to go, including the shop drawings for the steel that Dalmont's did, and he gave it to the successful contractor. He looked at it, approved it, and built the steel. The steel for the China Pavilion went up before the steel for UK and Canada, which had been in the ground starting with foundations in late 1980. So in 81, we started the China Pavilion, and in 82, we opened it. But all our steel was up. People came up to me and said, "How'd you do this?" And I said, "Dalmont's grants did the shop drawings. We got the steel, it went up perfectly, and off we ran." Now, China has really detailed work. So if you look at it, you see the painted designs and all sorts of things like that. It's all done with vinyl stickers. They go on the fiberglass surfaces. There's 8,000 pieces of fiberglass in the China Pavilion, and most of it and much of it is covered with vinyl stickers that Dalmont's also designed and the central shops built, and then we installed it. During the installation phase, we were working like crazy, and one night, we were working on the front gate. If you guys know the China Pavilion, there's a gate out front. Many of the pavilions had an entrance gate, if you will. This is a very tall entrance gate, and we were working with a few lights, kind of in the dark. Dick Nunes drove up in his golf cart, came to me, and he said, "Could you use more light on this gate while you're working on it tonight?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that would be great." He got on his radio and he called the fire department, and they brought a fire truck out, and he said, "Set up here and shine the lights from the fire truck on the gate so these guys can work." And they did. They put the pads out, they turned the lights on, and we worked with that. Dick drove off, and they stayed for an hour and a half or something, and then they had to leave, and we finished. And that really helped that night. That's the power of the management team at Disney. They can get things done like that. And that was just really a neat experience. So China was there for opening day, except for the restaurants and the museum. And I've got more about restaurants and museum, but let's move on to Morocco. Morocco is entirely different. There's no stick-ons in Morocco. Everything that you see from a color standpoint is hand-painted by Moroccan artisans. And what we did was we chose, the designers chose, as Ahmad Jafari and Habib Yasharel were the two principal designers for the pavilion. And they chose from two books of Moroccan artwork that was sacred, or well, not really sacred, but typical Moroccan architecture that was done for the Moroccan king. And so the patterns were in there for wood and tile and plaster. And what we did was we chose from those, made copies of the book, and said, "This is what we want in this room, this is what we want in this room, this is what we want in this room, this is what we want on the tower." And if you know Disney and how they go about these things, you choose recognizable architectural pieces from each country to represent the country itself, and you put it together in a little microcosm of the country itself. So for the Moroccan pavilion, the decision was made that the best way to get the artisan look was to hire artisans in Morocco and bring them to Florida. Have work done in Morocco, ship it to Florida, and then have the artisans come and help install it or put it in place. And that's what we did. 22 Moroccan artisans lived on property for 6 months to install the work on the pavilion. The basic foundations and walls and that for the pavilion were done by Disney and the contractors we hired for that. So we had bare concrete walls and no decoration. I flew to Morocco to check on the work, and I watched them cut the mosaic tile, and I watched them build the wood ceilings and doors in the wood shops. I approved the design first articles for the light fixtures. We looked at the furniture. We looked at the moucharabillé, which is the turnings for some of the lattice work in the restaurant. And then we talked to the plaster guys. The plaster was not actually, nothing was done on that until they came to the field. 9 metric tons of tile were shipped in a container from Morocco to Walt Disney World. We unloaded it in pails and kegs and that on the site. We built very flat surfaces that could take wall lengths of tile, and the Moroccan artisans put them together. This is my special hammer that was given to me by the Moroccan artisans at the conclusion of the work. And they made a gift to me of this. This is what was one of the hammers that was used to cut the tile. So it was cut like this. And just to watch those guys do that on site, but to have seen it done in Morocco was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I have a few pieces of broken tile that were going to be discarded that I collected that was kind of interesting from how this is, and I can share with people, you know, how it was cut and the like. So those guys were terrific. I got a lot of stories about that, which we can do again at another point in time, but that was terrific. I even got to carve a little bit of the plaster on the site, and the guys patterned it out, and then I watched how they did it, and I thought, this is so cool. Can I do some of that? And they said, yeah, here you go. So I got to carve a few things in the plaster in one portion of the complex out there, of the pavilion. Absolutely fantastic. One story for you. There's 2 stories like this, but the one story that stands out was we walked into the wood shop where the ceilings for the museum were being done, and the conversation went on without me understanding it. And finally, we had an agent who came to me and said, we have a little problem. I said, okay, what is it? That's why I'm here, to solve problems. And he said, they don't want to do the designs you drew and that you called out. I said, well, why is that? He said, they've already done them. They don't want to repeat them. They'd like to do different designs for you, for the pavilion at Epcot Center. And I said, well, let's talk it over with them. And it was going to be nothing less than what we saw in the books in terms of detail, color, intricacy, all of that. And I said, go ahead, and then ship it over. And what you see has never been done before and is unique to the Moroccan pavilion. So it's a really cool way of working with things, right? And you learn a lot from that. So we have the comparison of China with 8,000 pieces of fiberglass or resin and decals, and actual real mosaic tile, carved plaster, woodwork, doors, brass, faucets for the fountains, all of that. So it's a real touchable thing. The best thing about Morocco for me is on the days when we opened, I was in the back in what we called the Medina area, and a guest approached me, not knowing who I was. I wasn't wearing anything like Morocco project manager. I was just standing there observing people. And this person came up to me and said, I'm lost. How do I get out of here? And I said, we accomplished, because if you go into Medina in Fez or Marrakesh, you have to take a guide with you. You have to have somebody that knows how to get through. The streets are very, very narrow, and they wind every which way. And if you do not, I made the mistake when I was a student, and a buddy and I went into the Medina, and we had to buy our way out. And so you're wise if you buy a guide to begin with, it's cheaper. So have somebody take you through. Luckily, I had somebody that knew it, right? He was our agent and could take us around. But that person that said to me, I'm lost, how do I get out of here? That was the culmination and the mark of success. So Italy, China, Morocco, Norway. Now, I didn't go to China, but I went to Morocco a couple of times, right, to work things out. Norway, there was a design process that required travel through Norway, and I got to go. Joe Rohde, Bob Kurzweil, Ron Bowman, I think, joined us, and myself. And we had a Norwegian American or American Norwegian fella that helped us, Robert Ryle, helped us on our travels. The folks, he was part of Norshow, which was the consortium put together to oversee and sponsor the pavilion and design. They took us everywhere in Norway, everywhere. We started in Oslo. We took a train over the mountains to Bergen, stopping along the way at some very interesting parts. We got up to Stavanger, which is the oil capital of Norway. We got on a helicopter. We flew out into the North Sea to land on an oil platform that was under working conditions, right? We stayed the day and flew back on the helicopter. We put our fingers in petroglyphs along a coastal road, 1,000-year-old petroglyphs carved by Vikings or whatever along that road. We went all the way up to Kautokeino to visit the Sami, which you get the reindeer people. And we visited with them. Joe and I made that trip with Robert. Bob Kurzweil stayed in the south of Norway and visited southern portions of Norway for his research. He was the producer on the pavilion. Joe was the art director and designer. We had a great time. This was terrific stuff. Joe Rohde is a linguist, so he likes native peoples, and we sat at dinner that evening with the reindeer people after some afternoon stuff, which I can tell you a little bit more about. And we sat at dinner with them, and we had a broad range of reindeer entrees. We had reindeer stew. We had smoked reindeer tongue. We had reindeer bone marrow for dessert. That's a different kind of thing. We had reindeer. You guys know what Slim Jims are? Little sausages in the package like that. They had packaged these things and we're going to make it a sale item. They didn't have a name for it. So Joe and I put our heads together and we thought, let's see, we could call it Slim Rudolph's. No, we said, let's call it Slim Blitzens. And we gave that to them. I have no idea what they did with it, but for us, it was hilarious. It was absolutely hilarious to name a reindeer product. So, reindeer and caribou, by the way, are exactly the same genetically animals. So when we got to the pavilion and we wanted to have reindeer meat in the restaurant, it had to be renamed caribou because you didn't want little kids thinking they're eating Rudolph. So I think it was called caribou on the menu. At any rate, Joe and I sat there that evening at dinner, and we thought one of the things that would be cool would be to see the northern lights. So we told Robert, we'd like to go outside. And this is November. We would like to see the northern lights. And the response was, there's no northern lights now. It's kind of bad season. And we thought, okay, can we go outside anyway and look? So Joe and I put on the heaviest clothes. I shipped all kinds of real heavy coats and stuff there. One of the gals that was one of the hosts was going to take us outside, and one of the other fellas, one of the hosts that we'd been with that day, and he was at dinner, he said to the gal in Sami, whatever they see, tell them it's the northern lights. Okay, we didn't know what they said. We went outside with the gal. Joe and I and the gal went outside together. And we're looking on the horizon, and we see this little, not these big flare-ups, which Nate's seen a million times, I'm sure, but none of that. There was these little jumpy things on the horizon. And the gal looked at us and said, Northern Lights. And we thought, oh, that's pretty cool. So we went back in. Joe is freezing. He's a California boy. He's freezing. I grew up in Wisconsin. I'm going, that's cold. Whatever. We get back in. We sit down, and the gal looks at the guy, and in Sami says, it really was the Northern Lights. And Ryan understood this, and Robert Ryle, he said, she just said, it really was the Northern Lights. So they said, tell Jeff and Joe, whatever they see, tell them it's the Northern Lights. And she came back in and said, well, it really was the Northern Lights, but just a little bit like that. So that was fun. That was absolutely fun. At breakfast the next morning, Joe and I came down, sat at one table, and one of the hosts came over and sat with us. Now, they're not speaking English. We're not speaking Norwegian or Sami at all. And Joe wants to learn how to speak some Sami language. So Joe's approach is this. He looks at him and he says, how do you say, how do you say? How do you say, how do you say? So if he gets the words, how do you say, he can point at something. So in Sami, he now knows the words, how do you say? And so he can point at the salt shaker or a tree or whatever. How do you say pencil? How do you say? And eventually, Joe has got enough words that he's conversing with this Sami host. And I'm going, holy smokes, this is so cool. And this is the relationship. So this is part of working for Disney. You don't get these experiences in most other places. You can travel, you can visit, you can go see clients, you can do that. I did that for 24 years with iTech, but you don't always get this same experience. You have some wonderful experiences. I had great experiences with iTech, but when you look at how you travel with other Disney folks and the types of things that you encounter, it's a fantastic experience and education, and you long for more of that. There's just tons of that happening. You know what that is? That's a piece of reindeer antler that has a hole drilled in it right here. And this, I think, is the hollow from the antler. This is the device that's used on the lasso for lassoing reindeer. And Joe and I were each presented with this along with a reindeer pelt, but we were presented this as a souvenir. And so we went outside that day when we arrived, and we were going to do reindeer lassoing. And there weren't any reindeer there, so Joe and I played reindeer. We ran around with our hands up like this, and the guy was going to lasso us. And so he had his rope, and he goes, oh, darn, I don't have a thing. And I pulled mine out of my pocket, and I said, you mean this? He goes, yes. And I said, well, give me the rope. And I started to string the rope, and I started through the big end here, right? I'm going to pull it this way and here, and I'm going to tie a knot here. And I started pulling it through here, and he said, no, you're not going to pull it through there. I go, okay. So show me how you do this, because I had a different idea. So the guy goes, he starts through here. He's going to tie the knot there. And I go, well, now you got to pull the whole rope through here. And he goes, oh, you're right. Start there. That's so cool. And eventually, he's swinging this thing around and roping Joe and me. And it's just an absolutely phenomenal thing. So we get done with our trip. Well, we're ready to leave that next day. And the Sami guys say to Joe and me, would you guys like to come back and do a reindeer migration with us? And Robert Riles, he's an anthropologist. And he's saying, they never ask anybody. They don't allow any outsiders in to do this with them. Even anthropologists who've been trying to study them for many years in this whole thing about the migration. They get negative thing, but now we're Disney, right? It's the power of Disney. So we said, sure. So they invited us back to do a reindeer migration with them. So I got ready. Joe got ready. We were going after video cameras so we could document it. I was getting ready with gifts. I was getting warm clothes and looking at tents so we could go on a reindeer migration, because they take the reindeer from the southern portion in Kautokeino, and they go across a strait of water, ocean water, to an island where the reindeer have their calves in the summertime, and then they bring them back, and they winter down in Kautokeino. So we're getting ready to do that. And Joe and I are back. We're talking about it. We're getting everything ready. There's more to the story when we got back, but the bigger part of the story is Chernobyl happened. And nobody was going to that northern region of the world at that time, because Chernobyl devastated things. It actually devastated the reindeer population. They were sampling reindeer for radiation, because reindeer eat the lichen in the ground, and the lichen accumulated the radioactivity, and they had to destroy 20,000 reindeer. So Joe and I never did get to go on the reindeer migration, but these are events that influence your life, right? Mount St. Helens, huge explosion, influenced my life. Part of that is I got to Disney, right? Chernobyl influenced my life because I was invited to go back to Norway to do a migration with the Sami. And you look back on these things and you go, in ordinary life, Chernobyl and Mount St. Helens, if you're just sitting in Orlando, Florida, or wherever, don't impact you, right? As a person normally, right? They're news items and they go away. They impacted me rather directly because they either offered me an opportunity, pushed me into something else, or allowed me or canceled something that I was doing. So it's kind of interesting. So where was I? Joe and I were traveling. Okay. We went all over Norway. It was a great trip. We got tons and tons and tons of information about all of the parts and pieces of Norway. We were in many more places than many Norwegians. So there's more stories than that. But let's see, what's next? That's it. That's 4 pavilions. Is that enough?
Yeah. Yeah. So I did mention a couple things about the sailboat. I don't want to leave the audience hanging.
Okay, so the sailboat was this. It wasn't a con. It was that there were North Shore was the group of folks that got together to sponsor the pavilion. Initially, Norway was going to be called Scandinavia, and the trick was to get enough of the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark together. Those three, that's Scandinavia. Finland's not part of that. It's a northern country, but it's not really called Scandinavia. That failed. And Steve Baker and his group worked really hard to bring the Norwegians into this. So Norwegians grabbed several companies throughout Norway to help fund the pavilion. And one of the last on board was a sailboat company, and we had a small, if you remember the ride, you landed in a little village, and around the village were buildings, and the companies that were part of North Shore were represented by businesses, if you will, in that little village. So there'd be a sign for a bank, Den Norsk Bank. There was a food company and the like. So all around that little village, you could see, and appropriately so, signs for businesses that were actually the sponsors. Well, we didn't like the fact that there was nothing in this little lagoon where you landed. And so I asked Robert and the other North Shore folks, I said, can we get something there? And I think they were also saying, we can I think Robert said, look, I think I can get a sailboat and you can put it in there. So we got an actual sailboat, small one, that sat in the pavilion in the lagoon, the ride trough essentially, in that little lagoon in that village. And that's that. It wasn't a con, it was kind of working together to do that. We did the same thing with materials for the pavilion, right? One of the guys that was helping with the construction helped get materials from Norway. So the roofs that you see on Norway, there's real large pieces of slate on some of the roofs. There are barrel tiles that came from old buildings in Norway that are they're actually on the roof in Florida. And so we worked on that. The chairs for the theater originally came from Norway. They were donated or priced right for us to use for the beautiful ash or maple chairs that were and benches that sat in there, custom made for the theater. So lots of good things happened in that way to make the pavilion seem more real. So Norway's kind of a combination of China and Morocco, right? So I got the bug for real materials after Morocco, and that's what happened in Norway. I actually physically went after that stuff to say, if we could get these, it would be so nice for the pavilion. That's what, when you say it makes things look real, that's part of it. That's part of it. What was your other one you had?
Well, and that was, I think that, the point is that Disney went to the lengths to get authentic. I mean, I can't think of any theme park company, Universal included, that would go to Norway to get barrel tile for a themed area. They would go to a roofing tile vendor here in Florida, Central Florida, and say, what do you got that looks like this? Right.
It's true. I had the bug. I asked the question. I said, and some people said, why are you doing that? I said, well, I think we can get the right look by doing this. And it took, it was Selmer Sande was the name of the construction company. And their contact here, Bjorn Johannesson, and I worked closely together. He was representing North Shore here in the construction mode, so he could, help with things, especially the VIP lounge. And he helped find the materials in Norway. He's Norwegian, and he helped find the materials in Norway. We could bring them here. When we got them, it was like, oh, that was great. I said, yeah, it took a lot of work, but that's the way to do it. You had one other one. What else?
Well, was there a Viking boat that ended up in the middle of
in the lagoon? All right. So we were approached by the Norwegians, and there's I want to say a club in Norway that reconstructs Viking longships. And they were in the process of doing one, but they said, would you like it at the pavilion? And, you have to do a lot of checking for stuff like this to make sure it's okay. And we eventually said yes. Well, they finished building it, and it's actually a Viking trading ship. And they built it, and they put it on a regular ship, and they sent it to New York. Actually, they sent it to Newfoundland. And they were going to sail it from Newfoundland into New York Harbor. And they had a crew that was going, and they asked us, do you have anybody that would like to make that sailing trip? And I don't like the concept of falling overboard in a Viking trader ship and drowning. So I searched around for someone. Well, I actually knew someone that actually had an 80-foot sloop, as Eric Ado. And so he could sail. I thought, well, he's the ideal candidate. And if you ask Eric, he'll tell you the story. He's got more to it than that. But he got a camera, a little Sony video camera with a waterproof housing, and he's going to film the trip. So he got on in Newfoundland, and they put rocks. They get rocks from the shore, and they put them in the bottom of the boat as ballast, right? So it keeps the weight low in the boat. And they got on the boat, and there's a little shelter on the boat, a little boathouse, I guess you call it. Wheelhouse, I don't know. There's a steering mechanism. There's a baler about this big, a big handle on it, and then it's scooped out of a tree. Right? So it looks like a feed scoop that you would use for horses, except it's giant. It's about this wide, about that long. And that's for bailing water out of the boat. So everything authentic on the boat. Eric got on with the rest of the crew. They start sailing. They're going for New York Harbor. And a gale force 9 storm hits. And Eric, you know, everybody's huddled down trying to survive the storm. And they're in the wheelhouse. He gets outside during the storm and he's filming it. The water, the waves, the rain, all of this. And so I got to see that when he got back. They sailed into New York Harbor. There were newspaper articles about it, New York Times or whatever, and it stayed there. That's when we kind of agreed that it would go into the lagoon right off of the Norway Pavilion. And it did. It came down. It was there for the dedication. That day, you know, Eric and I talked about this whole thing. My young son, Christopher, and I were in the boat rowing out to the island in the boat. So we actually rowed that boat out to the island and back, anchored it there, and that's where it stayed for a long time. It just got really beat up by, you know, weather and time, and so eventually it had to be removed. But it sat for a long time behind the pavilion after that. But it's a real boat. It survived a force 9 hurricane, if you will, gale force 9 storm. Eric's got the film to prove it. The newspaper article proves it, and it got on a truck and got shipped down to Walt Disney World, and through the gate, stuck it in the water. Very, very cool thing. Just to have rode that out to the island and back. It was a very cool thing.
There's a story that I just have to hear this again. There was a story that you told me a long time ago, and please recount it for me, about how Walt Disney had his mustache lit on fire.
You can find this online as well. But I heard it before it was memorialized with a Disney legend. And the Disney legend is Ken Anderson. And he tells the story I don't know where it is online, but it's somewhere. It's in the Disney archives, obviously. But Ken told me one day, we were sitting and talking, and he said, well, I have a funny story about Walt and his mustache. And I said, okay. He said, well, one day we were in a meeting, right? The animators and that in a meeting. And he said, everybody smoked at that point. Walt smoked. And he said, I had just bought a new lighter and I had it in my pocket. It was a butane lighter. And I was close to Walt. And he pulled out a cigarette. And I thought, well, what the heck? I'll get my lighter out and light it up for Walt. So he pulled the lighter out and he hit the flint, and the flame, somehow the wheel had got adjusted to a high flame. And when he moved it over by Walt, it singed his mustache. And it was like silence in the room, right? Here's Ken, here's Walt, here's a burned mustache, and a lighter in Ken's pocket, which quickly got put back in the pocket, I guess. And so everybody, you know, at the end of the meeting was like, well, Ken, it's been nice knowing you. It was great knowing you. I'm sure you worked here real well and all that. And everyone's going, oh, this is just terrible. Probably not going to be here tomorrow. Tomorrow arrives. Ken's at his desk. The normal lunch procedure was people go up on the roof. There was a cafe on the roof of the animation building, and everybody ate up there. And Walt came into Ken's office earlier than the lunch hour and said to Ken, let's go to lunch. So they went up on the roof, and they were sitting there at a table having lunch when everybody else arrived. And at that point, everybody, according to Ken, everybody knew that 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 Ken was okay. Walt didn't have a mustache. He had to shave it all off and start over, according to Ken. But Ken and Walt were good. Everything was fine. And that, to me, is when you look back on the stories about Ken and all that, he was one of my favorite people ever. And now when I watch film like 101 Dalmatians or the Aristocats, Ken said he was instrumental in developing the Xerox process for creating all the puppies. He told Walt, he says, I can't figure out how we're going to get all these puppies, but here's an idea. Let's Xerox, make puppies Xerox. And that's essentially, now what was the rest of the process? I don't know, but that's how Ken said he got into that process. I thought that was really telling. It was just great sitting with Ken. It was great sitting with him. And you learn so much by doing that. So that satisfy your curiosity?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, you have your name in a window above Disneyland Paris. I guess, what did you do in order to have that happen?
Well, those are special things, and nobody knows until the very end who's on a window. So Eddie Sato and Marty Sklar put together the list and the locations for windows with names and the cute sayings that go along with them, right? So Mickey Steinberg and Fred Beckenstein have a window, and it's English language taught here. And they're from Atlanta, so the accent is quite thick. So it was humorous in that regard. So there are lots of windows all over, right? Eisner, Wells, a lot of people have windows. The project managers or project directors for the lands in the Magic Kingdom in Europe, Paris, there's 6 guys. So David Todd, Paul LaFrance, John Verity, Rick Girdley, Tony Catton, and me. And alphabetically, they're all on one window. And sometime I'll show you them. I got pictures of it. So the window is on Main Street East, and it's above the area where you enter the arcades. And it's 2 windows, actually. And one window on the left is one of the Dalmatians for like a fire truck Dalmatian. And the window says Main Street Fire Department. And the second window says, lists the names, and then it says putting out fires before they begin. So it's a kind of a spoof on a fire department in Main Street, right? Because there's a fire department in Main Street. Now, I guess I told you the rest of the story because I was back in France over Christmas and New Year's. And on Christmas Day 2022, my family and I, 5 of us, went to Disneyland Paris. And of course, one of the first places you go when you get into the park is Town Square. So Town Square East is where, and I'm looking at the window and I got my family there and I'm saying, here's my window, take my picture, this is great, and all that. And we finish all that, we're ready to walk off, and my daughter says, hey, there's 3 firemen. And I went, what? And I turn around and there's 3 firemen walking out of the arcade, and they're going over to one of the offices in Town Square East, which is where they have an office. It's the real pompier, right? The pompier for Euro Disney. They're the real firemen that work there. So they're in costume, but it's their uniform that they wear when they're working. So I look over at them, it's 3 of them, and I said, Monsieur le pompier, s'il vous plaît, je voudrais une photo avec vous. The fenêtre en haut is my window, right? So that's on my nom. And I said my name, Jeff Burton. I said, that's me. All in French. I'm amazed I got the words out. So they walked over and I said, I want a picture with you guys. So I have my picture with these 3 firemen. And I'm standing there and I'm going, this is the greatest thing ever. I couldn't be happier. So they finished, they walk away, we're walking away, and they walk over, and one of them comes running back, and he's got the patch that they wear on their uniform that says you're a Disney Fire Department, the pompier. And they give it to me. They said, there you go. Well, it got even better. Not only did I get my window picture, I got a picture with the firemen, and I got the patch. And it's just such a fantastic experience and this is 30 years after the park opened. So it's the 30th anniversary of the park. And we were there for that. We didn't plan it that way. There's other things involved with the planning, but that was a terrific, absolutely terrific 5 or 10 minutes right there by that window. This is terrific. So people get windows because they were honored at some level to be a part of or having been a part of the park. So there's lots of names all over. I took pictures of lots of windows in Town Square and on Main Street that help memorialize the folks that helped put things together. It was really cool. 2 of those guys now, David Todd and Tony Catton, have passed on. So David was a few years back and Tony preceded him. So I think Verity is still around, Paul LaFrance, and Rick Girdley, I think, are still there, and myself. So, but very cool stuff. Very cool stuff.
Well, do you guys want to transition to process?
Yeah, let's do that. But let me ask a question of the folks. So we have electrical engineers, we have marketing, we have industrial design, right? So those 3 things are represented. What makes you guys interested in themed design and theme parks?
And let me interject and give them a little plug before, I know I've been talking a lot, but they're all part of their respective TPED or TEA Next Gen clubs.
Okay.
Yeah. So they can talk about that.
One of the reasons I'm asking is that, one, it helps me understand where you're at in your professional life, but the other one is I've been part of what we call TEI, Themed Environments Integration graduate program at the University of Florida on the campus in Orlando. And they have a cohort of 19 or 20 students who come from various backgrounds, just like you guys. So structural engineering, mechanical engineering, civil engineering, theater design, production design, things of that nature. And they get together and they go for 2 semesters or more, either for a certificate or for a master's degree in themed environment integration. And the reason they call it themed environment integration is because they're bringing together all the different parts and pieces. You guys are eligible to go into that program. And if you need more information, I'll get it to Nate, so you can contact Steve Grant, who runs the program for the University of Florida in the City Lab in downtown Orlando. And I go down and speak. We talk about process. We talk about project management. We talk about lots of things that help these students get to where they want to go in various places. Some want to work for Disney, some want to work for Universal, some want to go into architectural offices that specialize in themed entertainment design and themed environments design. But that's a plug for the program that I'll leave you with, and we can talk about it later. But for you guys, just tell me a little bit about why you're interested or why you joined the TEA club. Okay, Sydney, your turn again.
I think for me, it started with theater. I got involved with musical theater at a very young age. I was 8 years old when I was in my first show, and it was a lot of the same principles of people coming from so many different backgrounds, a lot of people with completely unrelated day jobs, but all coming together with this shared love of theater and wanting to produce this unique and special performance where no two performances are the same. I thought there was something really magical and special about that quality of it, and being able to put on this production to diverse audiences and making them feel something, evoking some kind of emotional connection and creating this experience and this memory for them. And when I was involved with theater, I mean, themed entertainment was not something I even considered. It's not something I knew existed. And I didn't discover it until I came to Notre Dame. And when I was made aware of our TEA and of different companies, it was actually an alumni talk with someone from Tate that made me aware that this entire industry existed. And once I really knew that that was a possibility, that's kind of when I was bit by the themed entertainment bug. And once I found out that that was a world that I could work in and I could make a career out of, I realized that was really special and something that I really wanted to be a part of. I wanted to create those experiences for people like I had with theater, and now I really can't imagine myself doing anything else. So however I can create those experiences, whether it is on a technical side or a more creative side or some blend of both, that sounds like a really fulfilling career for me. So
All right, excellent. Who had to leave early? Is that Matt?
Yes.
Why don't you tell me just briefly what got you into TEA?
Yeah, so I love building Legos and Connects growing up. That was my passion. Just love building new things. But as I grew up and I got to college and I realized I love bringing joy to people's lives, bringing smiles to their faces, and I wanted to do it in the most innovative and new ways ever seen before. And so since getting to college, I've been blessed to be able to work with Universal R&D, Storyland Studios, now with American Scenic, and just love being able to create things that people never seen before and leaves a lasting memory with them. So
Perfect.
that's my story.
Okay. All right. Hey, Danny.
So again, kind of similar to Sydney, I didn't really, and I think Matthew too, like I didn't think of it as a realistic possibility, I guess, until college and seeing like I came in as a freshman during the COVID year. And so our club was more of like a social sort of thing of just like a way to actually get to see people, which we didn't do very often that year. So at first it started off as just fun. And then sophomore year, we got to go down to like the IAPA conference in Orlando. And that was kind of eye-opening of like, there are so many opportunities, and it's not only like the Disney and the Universals, that there are like hundreds of companies out there that contribute to these incredible projects. So personally, I think it was that. And then since then, I've been trying to figure out where does electrical engineering fit in it. And I think it's such a general discipline that anywhere from like the lighting systems that I've become pretty interested in. And even from there, like I've taken classes in animation and stuff that I think would be really cool to be applied kind of anywhere in the industry.
Very valuable skills. Very, very, very valuable skills. At Disney, I had, I'd like to piece it all together, but 4 lighting designers for projects. 4 lighting designers, not 1, 4, right? Regular lighting, themed lighting, landscape lighting, and then show lighting, right? Incredible. Everybody with a specialty. So there's lots of rooms for somebody with a double E. Hey, John, what about you?
Yeah, so for me, growing up, the short story is I was terrified of roller coasters. I grew up near Hershey Park and was scared to death of them. But as the story goes, you overcome the fear, and one summer and you ride up, and suddenly you've ridden all of them, and then you've just got to keep riding. So for me, I started as this roller coaster enthusiast, and that was a lot of fun. But also being a nerd at the same time, like I just was like, there's these, next page to turn to, and next layer to reveal and looking at like actual theme park design. And I just became super fascinated by that. And what gave it staying power in my career, focus, or, wanting to be in the industry is this idea of, it's not just the surface level fun, as Matthew talked about. It's the memories, it's the family times that you create, the meaningful moments. And even, as John Hench kind of talked about, it's not about, like just escapism, but it's also the idea of reassurance. That really like resonated with me and was like, okay, this isn't just something that I want to do for fun, but there's like actual like deep meaningfulness to this industry. And so that made me want to pursue that. Started out as wanting to be an engineer, but that hit a stop at AP Physics in high school, where I was like, okay, that's probably not for me. But at the same time, I knew I had like creative outlets, but I wasn't an artist in that sense. So I was like, what's like a middle ground where I could be in the industry, but I'm not, a full-on technical specialist, and I'm not a full-on, concept artist or artist per se. And so that kind of led me into the realm of marketing, where I could still be in the industry, more like connecting people to the experiences than creating them themselves. So yeah.
Let me start with where you're at with marketing. Most of us in the industry, including, and this is, I'll work this into process, Nate, so you can feel comfortable that we got there. Part of the experience is, and we used to say this a lot, your experience begins when you first hear about the product, the attraction, the park, or whatever. That's when the experience begins. So it's a guest experience, and that's when it begins. So John, when you talk about marketing something, if you're not into the story and you're not into how to, let's say, publicize what's there and translate what you're seeing into the attraction of that for guests, right? I think about working with Charlie Ridgway and the marketing folks at Disney. They're always interested, and I have stories about that, interested in what's going on, and they have to dig deep to find out, and then they can write something about it, and that's where you come in. And so you're at the very, very beginning of the guest experience, but you're really at the end of the process, right? And so when you got to link those two things together and discover all that. If you call those the slices of bread, you got to link together all the bologna in between and pick out the right stuff. I have a really good friend out in California who does movie trailers, and he's been very, 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 very successful. He started at Disney, formed his own company, and he has to sit and watch dailies and then develop ad campaigns and all that kind of stuff just for promoting films. And I'm sure he does other stuff as well. So the list of stuff is very large, and he and I were temporary roommates for a couple of weeks out in California when we first started for Disney. He in marketing and me at Imagineering. So you got to grab all that good stuff that's in the middle, right? All that stuff that's sloshing around, and figure out what's important for people to know and see and do. So that's terrific. All right, on to a little bit more process, because Nate said everybody's interested in how things get started. Well, I suppose you could say somebody said we need a China pavilion in Epcot Center for opening day, right? Which is the words that were used when they came to me. Now, I'm not the designer, I'm not the creator, I'm not anything. That really, like you're saying, John, is the creative portion of this. But I have to manage the process of getting it there by opening day. How are we going to do that? And what's it going to contain? So at Disney, there are people who are scope writers, and they essentially put together a document that says what's in the pavilion, right? And the first part of it might be, what does it look like? And this is where someone like Herbie Ryman or Ken Anderson or Bob Clatworthy or any number of other folks get together and do a simple, well, not simple, a single drawing of this is what we think it should look like. And that becomes the inspiration for everything else that happens there. And you can call that high concept, or you can call it blue sky, because at that moment, there's no budget attached. There's no number of seats in the restaurant aren't there. You don't even know if there's food and beverage there. Is there retail? Likely. Is there food and beverage? Likely. Is there something inside that building that you see? Is it a film? Is it a ride? Is it just a stage show? What is it? Nobody really knows. So there's a brainstorming session where people start to toss around ideas. And at EPCOT, when you look at sponsorship, everybody looks at, they know circle vision, right? Sponsors know circle vision. So they'll go, we want a circle vision. We want a circle vision. Well, you can only have so many of those, and then people get tired of looking at them. So guests are not going to go to every circle vision because they're going to go, we're going to sit through another circle vision. So Marty Sklar was smart and John Hench was smart, and they said, well, maybe we have two circle visions. One was Canada and the other was China. France was 5 nights of a circle vision, and I think there was one other that was partially kind of circle vision-ish. But you can't do all circle vision. So you have to start determining what's there. And this is where that brainstorming session starts to come down into gelling into what's in the pavilion, what is there. And I'm using these as examples because you can identify with them. The process is the same almost anywhere. You have to have a document that starts to define what's going to be there. At iTech, we called this a program, right? And a program was very detailed. I wrote them, right? They could start out at 20 pages on a standardized format, and they can grow to 125 pages with lots of information in there. One of the next steps in the process is to begin looking at what you would call high concept, and you have to define this high concept with sketches. And in theater we know this, right? Because you can do scene sketches. You do the same thing for an attraction. You're doing sketches of what the experience is going to be like, somewhat in sequence. At Disney, they call these things storyboards, especially for rides and shows, so that you could start to look at it. Film, and it comes from the film industry, storyboarding a film. So you can look at it and you can switch things around because they individual sketches, and you can move them around on what they call a storyboard. You watch people at WDI walk around with 4x8 sheets of corkboard into which you pin sketches and stories to help you clarify when things are going to happen in an attraction. And that comes again from the film industry. Once you've got that kind of gelled, there's still movement in it. You can go into from a high concept and storyboarding imagery, you can go into a concept stage where perhaps for an attraction like a pavilion, there's a footprint developed that says the elements need to be in these positions, and you develop some sort of a plan, right, that moves guests from, say, the promenade through a front entry gate into a principal attraction, into farther deep into it. Maybe there's retail, food and beverage. Lots of this, though, is determined by capacities that need to be met. And that's another whole discussion. But, a restaurant's a certain size for a reason. Retail is a certain size for a reason. The attraction itself is a certain size for a reason. And you have to learn how to pull all those together. And that's a much, much, much larger discussion. But let's say that you've landed on that, and industrial engineers at Disney help determine those types of things. Once you're past the concept, you're gradually buying this off. When I got to Disney, I had no idea what someone was talking about when they said, we have a John and Marty meeting. I said, what is that? He said, well, we have to show John Hench and Marty Sklar where we're at with the project. Oh, only a few people can go into the meeting. I said, can I go in? They said, no. I said, how am I going to learn about the project? And I have to report on it. At any rate, eventually I got to go to John and Marty meetings, but the creative types would go in there and they would sit and present sketches and storyboards. And that's when you see people lugging down the hall boards with what's going to be in the show. And Marty would look at it and he would say, I don't know, that's not strong enough there. Or can we change that around or whatever? And so you got feedback. And this concept then gradually gets developed. At the very earliest stages, at least at Disney, the financial guys got involved and they were the estimators. And they would take a look at a sketch and they would try to figure out what parts and pieces were there and attach numbers to it at a very high level. And someone at corporate would say, you have $20 million or $30 million or $100 million or whatever it was to build this pavilion. And somehow you had to squeeze all these things in there. And so alongside all the creative folks were the estimators developing budgets and really high level estimates for what this was going to be. How much can we spend on a show? Is it a film? There's a number of dollars per minute for a film to be made. Is it live action or is it animated or is it CGI? Those things all cost different amounts of money per minute. The same thing is true for architecture. How much can we build? Do we need to showcase lots of architecture? If you notice when you walk into a World Showcase pavilion, it's usually got a courtyard in it and it's surrounded by architecture. Germany's that way, Morocco's that way, China's that way, Japan is that way. All of them look basically the same. UK and Canada. UK has a bunch of little buildings like it's a little village in England, right? Canada has a circle vision, but you walk into an environment. So this environment's being developed gradually over time and it coalesces into something that fits a budget and an estimate and a capacity for what needs to be built there to handle all the attendance that's going to be coming through, right? And so there is some science to it. There's a lot of science to it, but you have to mush the science together with the creative part to make it work. Once you've got a concept approved, you can go into a schematic design. The schematic design starts to put real sizes, heights and volumes and lengths and depths and real thoughts about materials into the design. So you start to see some dimensions developed for the project, right? It occupies a place in space, right? It has an orientation. Walls are developed. Basic entries and windows are developed. Some basic elevations are developed. Heights, scale. Disney's famous for scaling buildings back so they can look like more building than is actually there. So if you look at Disneyland, it's done, Main Street's at 5/8 scale. Walt Disney World, I think, is 3/4. I can't remember, and this is bad on my part, but I can't remember what it was at Europe. It's at least 7/8. It could be more. If you go backstage at Disneyland or backstage at Walt Disney World, and you walk upstairs into some of the operations offices, the windows are down at the floor level because they are part of a second story outside. It's kind of funny because you look down and you go, oh, what's going on there? And the windows are real low, but the offices occupy more space. So there's 3 stories shown, but only actually 2 stories that are usable, right, in the building. So those types of things are beginning to be developed, and you're starting to assign spaces and functions to the spaces and all the things that go along with it, right? Restrooms, break rooms, back of house maintenance, projection rooms, audio video rooms, all those things, right? Electrical closets, all the things that are part of that. Once that's looked at and you have a schematic design, you can get that approved as well. and this is where architecture's been involved since concept, is starting to put together the parts and pieces that make up the pavilion. Once that's approved and everybody agrees that it can probably meet the budget, you can meet a time schedule, right? You can probably get all this built in that proper amount of time. You can get the production done for sets and scenics and the like. You go into design development. Design development takes into account all the theatrical things that might be part of this. So it's the look and feel of all the parts and pieces. Stone finishes, stucco finishes, roof finishes, what things are like inside. The colors start to be developed. The furniture and the furnishings start to be developed. You're choosing those things that are important to the storyline. And remember, all the time you're doing this, everything harkens back to a story, right? Story, 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 story. If it doesn't belong there, don't draw it, right? If it does not further the story, don't draw it. And I have some stories about this as well. They're very interesting. But once you're in design development, you are getting a very clear picture that can be estimated to a very detailed level. You can call out materials, you can call out all the rest of the parts and pieces and show someone what a room is going to look like and the like. When that's approved, you go into what we would call a documentation stage for construction and production. And usually that's called working drawings. So this is very detailed dimension drawings, very detailed interior elevations, exterior elevations, sections, structural engineering drawings, electrical engineering drawings, mechanical engineering drawings, plumbing drawings, area development drawings, site drawings, all the parts and pieces that are required to be built for that particular attraction. And if you pull this all together correctly, you can have hundreds of sheets of documents along with specifications, right? That generally are pretty standardized, right? So it's fairly easy to pull that together because you're not going to change the spec for paint. You're not going to change, you might change the colors, but you're not changing the spec. You're not changing the spec for structural steel. You're not changing the spec for wood. You're not changing the spec for ceramic tile. All those things have specific approved by the owner, say Disney, types of materials that can be used. What you're changing is the color, the sizes, the shapes, all those types of things. So fabrics, all that. Once you have that set of documents, and I realize this is a quick study in this. Once you have that set of documents, you could go out to get it priced. So you find contractors and production houses that can price the show, the film, the audio, the sets, the scenics, all the materials that are needed for this, and then you can go get it built. And that set of documents really is what gets the final approval by corporate management at Disney or any other company. Universal works the same way. All the clients I work for, same way. We had a funny story with the Billy Graham Library. We had drawings that were 11 by 17. They're used to seeing great big drawings that were architectural drawings. Our drawings were 11 by 17 and everything was contained in there short of the architecture, which was determined by us, but then by iTech Entertainment, but then drawn to larger drawings so the building could be built. But all the show elements were done at 11 by 17, so you could carry that around. The big expression at the Billy Graham Library by the folks there was, oh, we'd say it's in the book. And so eventually they'd say, is it in the book? We'd say, yeah, it's in the book. It's on this page. It became kind of a fun story to tell about how we arrived at what was going to be in the Billy Graham Library. So that's kind of a short story, and I will delve deeper into any questions you have about process. But the main thing to remember is that it starts very early with very limited information, a storyline that has to be followed, and gradually builds till you get a set of documents from which you can actually execute the project. And there's lots to that, right? There's a lot to it. So I will answer questions, whatever you might have.
First off, I just want to say thank you so much, Jeff, for taking the time. This has been so informative, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, no, my one quick question before I need to head out, unfortunately, is there that, if you go back, all those years ago, is there like advice you would give to yourself? What's something maybe you'd done differently? Young professionals?
What would I do differently? That's a really good question. I was one always I was always in a learning mode with Disney. And I had to transfer every bit of what I learned to the position I had at High-Tech Entertainment, because I did not have 4 lighting designers there. I did not have an estimator. That was me. I did not have a scheduler. That was me. So I basically did all those things. I think I probably, knowing what I did later in life, I probably should have dug deeper into other things that were going on at Disney. That doesn't mean I didn't get a great education there, but I think I knew people at Disney who did not take advantage of things that I did take advantage of. I mean, I spent hours sitting with Ken Anderson talking about his experiences at the studio and his experiences in Africa. He took a trip down the Nile River. He had sketchbooks that he did on the Nile River. He brought them back to the studio. They made copies of the sketchbooks. Ken gave me copies and signed them over to me. That's one of the choicest things I could ever experience. I know somebody who, when we were working on the Africa Pavilion, didn't really want Ken in the room because they wanted to be the designer. And I thought, that's extraordinarily strange. Here's a guy that's worked with Walt, is still here among us, and you can learn so much. My encouragement to you and all the 4 of you, and to Nate, and I know you're all knowledge hounds, but don't think anything that you see in a place that's, if you're going into themed entertainment design, is off limits. Figure out how to get in there. I was back where they were doing special effects. I didn't learn enough about special effects. I learned about interior design. I hung out with the interior designers. I hung out with the audio guys. I hung out with the live entertainment guys. I didn't learn enough about live entertainment. They liked me because I would figure out how to get them stuff they needed. They felt they had a voice in me when I could help them get parade light poles or antennas under the promenade or whatever. If you're focused on one thing and you do that very well, you will benefit. And that is the process at TEI, the University of Florida program, whereby people share all these things and they begin to figure out how much other stuff is involved. Legal stuff, right? I was in lawsuits. Industrial engineering. You've got to, especially at Disney, you've got to get your fingers into all these other places. If I'd had more time, that's what I would have done. I was expected to do projects, right? And report on projects. So that takes up all your time. Wherever you can, you work like crazy, right? Some weeks, I had 102 hours in France one week on my timesheet. 102 hours. It's crazy. But you have to put the time in, you have to do it. And the thing is, you're doing it for yourself. You're learning. And those are all transferable skills. So you learn one place, you can carry it somewhere else, which is why I was successful at iTech. So if that's something I mean, I want to put the positive spin on it because I think I had great experiences in many ways. So carry that with you. Did you disappear? Uh-oh.
Oops, there he
Oh,
is.
it's
He may
okay.
have frozen, but
Yeah.
he's back.
Does that help?
You're on mute, Matthew.
Thanks. Sorry, for some reason everything froze.
Yeah.
No, but I heard the majority of that, and that was extremely helpful. And that's definitely something I'm thinking about. You know, I really like a couple aspects of the industry, but some things are fascinating. So thank you so much for your time, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Matthew. Anytime I can help, let me know.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good
Good luck.
guys.
Absolutely.
All right, Matthew needs to go.
good.
Do you have any, does anyone want the last word, last question?
I have one non-process related question that maybe would make sense to get out now before the next meeting. So talking about DLP Main Street, or your Disney Main Street at the time, I know that in the early stages of the process, it was going to be the 1920s setting. At least is what I've heard from, I believe, Eddie Sato, or I think. Was that a stage that you were involved in the process, or whatnot? Because I'm very curious about that entire brainstorming process and how it didn't come about and everything.
Well, Eddie's a genius. When I started in Europe. Look, I lived in France for a year while I was studying. I went to the École des Beaux-Arts in Versailles. And so when the Paris project came up, I volunteered. I said, hey, I'll go back, right? When I was with Disney. And so I got the opportunity with Wing Chow and the real estate group. So I took that, and so I was flying back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And then Disney changed their management of the project for the theme park, and went back to, and this is another whole story, but in the end, what happened is I had to fly to California, and then I met Eddie. And Eddie and I, he was in a small office, and he was drawing stuff like crazy for the 1920s, Main Street. And he essentially, he's a Disney file that goes back, a long way. And he knew everything about Disneyland. And I think he started at he wasn't Knott's Berry Farm. I think he was at Disneyland.
Yeah, he was Knott's Berry Farm. He was.
Yep.
Yeah, because he did crazy or wacky soapbox racers, and has some good stories about that too. Yeah,
he's a genius designer, and he's got his own company now. But he was going at this, and I'm sure he was talking to Marty and John, and actually Eddie, all the ideas he actually had private meetings with Michael and Frank, right? There's another story about that I can tell you when we were over there. But so his job was to get a Main Street that would be unique, and that's why it has arcades and then the 20s look. And there's some story about the arcades as well. There's a reason for that. But Eddie was great about designing these things and pulling it all together. And so I met him, and we worked together, right? He didn't relocate until late in the game, but the drawings were fantastic. The way he went about the Discovery Arcade and the Liberty Arcade, bringing those two aspects of the United States together with bringing a U.S. influence over this. He went back, and we had a crystal. Was it the Crystal Palace? Was at Disneyland at one time. He wanted to bring that back, and that came back in Paris as well. So there's 11 buildings on Main Street, and Eddie was responsible for all those, and great designs and very challenging things to build. And there's stories about that as well, because we had two separate contractors do that, not a single contractor. but it was fun working with Eddie. It was a funny story because I had just been appointed the project director for Main Street, right? So I flew back to California with my wife was in California at that time, and we went down to a fly fishing shop in the south of LA, and walked in there, and I was talking about getting a fly reel and all that stuff, and somehow we bumped into Eddie's dad, and we kind of said, yeah, we're going to go over to Paris, and I'm going to be the project lead for Main Street. And he said, yeah, my son's the project guy for Main Street. I said, okay. So it was two of us together there. So I said, oh, it's great to meet you and all that. And it was just a fun time, meeting his dad. And then we talked about that later too. So kind of a fun time to be at Disney and be around the genius that some of these people were that really could pull these things together. So I was not around for all the design. When I got to France, because of the restructuring, they were looking for someone who had a lot of thematic experience, and I happened to fit the bill. So I moved over from real estate development to Walt Disney, what they call it EDLI, Euro Disneyland Imagineering, EDLI, for that. But by that time, the drawings had been completed, and we were in the bidding stages, and I was there just as we were opening bids on the project. So it was a little bit like Italy all over again, but it was get the whole thing built this time. So that was the fun part. So a lot of drawings, huge amount of drawings, lots and lots of drawings. So big paper rolls of drawings. So does that help?
Yeah, that does. Was 1920s, I don't want to say dead, but at that point had the decision already been made to go with this more turn of the century Marceline Missouri concept?
Yeah, because we had the you can see there's an old vehicle in one of the shops, and so that decision had been made already, and that's probably something that Eddie and Marty and John worked out to say this is probably a better direction to be turn of the century. But I mean, we're pretty close, turn of the century in the 20s, so it didn't take a lot to to back off just a little bit in time frame. And I really don't think a lot of people notice the difference that much, right? When you walk down the street. I mean, we've got, I think the fact that there's horse-drawn carts and an old carriage and the like, but there's still the Main Street buses. There's a double-decker bus there now. That's not exactly a turn of the century. That's a little bit later in time. So I think it's kind of melded together a little bit. But I was not part of that process or the decisions there. But so that had already been done. But it was a handful just to get everything started and going. There's a lot of stories with that. So.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes. We good for now?
Sydney, last word?
I don't think anything from me. Just
Okay.
thank you so much for your time in this call. It's really been an awesome session, and I've loved hearing all the stories that you have to share.
Well, there's more, and what I would encourage you to do for next time is think about things you want to know more about that I could shed some light on or help you with direction in where you're going, or help you understand process a little bit more. I kind of glazed over it, but there really is some important things that need to be talked about. And if you have curiosity about those things, bring that to the next time we meet. Start a list. Like I tell Nate, take notes. And next time we'll tell you the Nate Naverson pencil story.
Yeah. A little embarrassed about that. But well, thank you so much for everything, guys. Just to let you know, I've been trying to get this meeting here for about 5 years with Jeff. So you guys are the tail end of a lot of work to try to pin Jeff down. He was so busy for so long, and but well worth the time. So thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for listening. And what we'll do is we'll regroup and come up with some more questions for a later date.
Terrific. It was my pleasure. So I'm looking forward to the next time, guys. Thank you for being patient.
All right. Thank you, and have a great night.